Welcome to Soul of Travel. I am so beyond excited to be sitting down with Sophia Hyder Hock today to talk about mindfulness in travel and talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, and just kind of making travel a richer place in general. So thank you so much, Sophia, for being here today.
I'm really excited, Christine. It's been a long time coming, so I know we have a lot to talk about.
Yeah, thank you so much. As my listeners know, I often am big fans of the humans that I get to connect with on this program, and you're definitely one of those. So I'm so excited to share this space, and I'm thankful for the way that the universe keeps bringing just these amazing people for me to speak to, and so just full of gratitude for this space today. As we begin the conversation, I'd love to give you a moment to introduce yourself and to talk a little bit about who you are in the space of travel right now and what that looks like.
That's a great moment for me to introduce a lot of things, I suppose. So, everyone, I'm so excited again to be on your podcast, Christine. So, my name is Sophia Hyder Hock, and I am the Chief Diversity Officer for Destinations International. Previous to this, I owned my own business called Papilia, and I was designing, facilitating, and creating DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies, trainings, and workshops, coaching services specifically for the travel industry. I have to say, I'm also a yoga instructor. That's really important to me. And so what's really important to me is to always include mindfulness and wellness principles into every project that I have. I'll stop right
Thank you
there.
for including that, because I think that is so important in just how I have seen you show up in travel, is that there's always just this extra component that I feel like really brings in this connection and love and respect of humanity and of self. And I think it just makes it so much more valuable to add that. And I also became a yoga instructor. I don't instruct often, but I went through the process, and it was really for me more about understanding all of the pieces beyond like the physical practice of yoga, but very much that mental and spiritual practice and that deep connection that it allows you to see and feel. And so I think that's really important, especially in this place in travel and in this place in time in the history of travel. I think to have that background as well.
Absolutely. It's taken me through professional and personal, my and professional and personal life, to be quite honest.
Yeah, I mean, it's just something. And I don't, for those of you listening who maybe haven't had that experience, I just cannot speak highly enough of exploring like the yoga way of living, in terms of just being able to just wrap your mind around so many things. And like you said, to get through what we've been facing in the last, 2.5, 3 years. I actually started my yoga training like right in the pandemic and did virtual yoga, which I thought would be insane. But I go back to that practice constantly to just like find myself, realize like it's going to be okay. And so, yeah, I love that is a commonality that we have. I would like to give you time too, just to get a little bit more of an understanding of who you are, to share with us a little bit about your how travel became a part of your life, which was really as a young child, and kind of having that understanding of being a global citizen. And so I'd love for you, Sophia, to just share with us and let us get to know you a little bit more.
Oh, thanks for the space, Christine. So I will take it back to when I was a kid. I am first generation Bengali and American, Bengali and Indian, and I was born in Indiana. So that's a whole other story in itself. But I'm the youngest of six, three boys, three girls, and when I was a kid, we moved around quite a bit. Indiana to Idaho to California is where we put down some roots. We then moved, if we're talking, we moved from California to the East Coast, but in between that time, between a West Coast and East Coast move, when I was 10, we moved to Sri Lanka. 10 to 12. And those were the most formative years, I have to say, of my life in many ways. I remember them so clearly because, moving from California to Sri Lanka is a big move from every standpoint, culturally, lifestyle, and it's something that you can't really prepare your kids for. You can just experience it. So when I was there, the Civil War was still happening, was still taking place, and there were times when I couldn't go to school because of their suicide bombings that were taking place for security reasons. So I used to go to work with my dad, and my dad used to do international development work. And I would just sit in his meetings, and I'm grateful that I was allowed to do that, at such a young age. But I just observed his mannerisms and the interactions that he would have, and I was just fascinated by them. And when we came back to the United States, back to California, it was this, kind of this reverse culture shock I had. I didn't really know how to integrate back into a lifestyle that I was used to, that I grew up in. And I wasn't sure how to reconcile, what I experienced. And I took that with me. We moved to the East Coast. We moved to Washington, D.C. And my first internship was working on Capitol Hill. And then after that, I wanted to explore international development work because I found myself inspired by it. And I did that for 15 or so plus years. I was working in a variety of different sectors, economic development, conflict mitigation, gender empowerment, working on agriculture and land farming rights. And it's something that always stays with me, because I remember both of my parents used to say this. They told me, Sophia, what's really important is one, that you listen, you're a humble listener and you listen to people. And the second is that don't ever think that you are better than someone. And so you treat everyone equally. And it's, especially in international development, it's really important because you can go to a place and think that you're somehow better than someone and you know what they need, but you don't know what they need. And so that has taken me through to the work that I continue to do today. Segued into travel into 2015, because I wanted to create more impact. And my work in diversity, equity, inclusion continued, but it was sparked by an app that I pitched, an idea for an app that I pitched when I lived in the Raleigh-Durham area. I was going to Argentina for a friend of mine's wedding, and I was looking for an app that could provide me with cultural etiquette advice, how to pack in an efficient way, but also culturally appropriate, and shopping advice. There wasn't an app for it. So I pitched the idea, and it ended up winning crowd favorite. And I had people, business and leisure travelers, that came up to me and were like, I could really use something like this, because when I travel to places, I feel like sometimes I either feel uncomfortable or communication is lost. And I want to feel comfortable. And I had my pause and reflect moment. And I thought, do I want to create an app, or do I want to create something that is truly sustainable, that can truly create impact? And I, thought about all the things that I love and I'm interested in. And I thought, I love people. I love design and facilitation. I love policy. That's my background. And I then thought, based on experiences that I've had traveling, I really wanted to explore the travel industry, because I thought it was fascinating that in the space of travel, in the hospitality industry, we're meant to be hospitable, but we're not, because we're humans. And how can we foster greater connections with people in a really genuine way? So that is what, that's how, my Papilia, that's how Papilia emerged. And then this recent new role that I've taken on is a perfect alignment with the work that I have been doing. And this position, it came to my attention, and I didn't feel like I was losing out on anything because it perfectly aligned with my work, and I could just create greater impact. And that's what it's always been about for me, being able to sustain passion and impact.
Um, Thank you so much for sharing that. There's just so many points in your story that I'm just like, oh, it just makes so much sense that this is who you are and how you express yourself in your career. And like, I'm imagining you moving to Idaho and what that experience must have been like. And then, to California. And then, like you said, going to Sri Lanka. And I just kind of envisioned this young Sophia, like being like, hey, what about, me in this space? And then like that became like, hey, what about all of us in this space? And so I just love that so much. Like I can just see that it ignited. And I think, like you said too, mentioning, having this app and have like starting to see success and momentum, and then having this moment of pause, I feel like that is a huge thing to draw attention to, because I think a lot of times in our career, especially as entrepreneurs, or just when you transition from one space to another, like you have these opportunities, and to be able to sit with some clarity and reflect and say, hey, like this is almost it, but isn't quite it. And to have the ability to like widen that out and say, this is what I really want out of my experience, and out of my career, and then to like slightly redirect. I feel like that's so powerful. And I love that you were able to do that. And I'm hoping that that gives a little like glimmer of what that could be like for people that are listening, because I think that's hard to do. And I don't know if you want to share anything more about that process, but I think that's really valuable.
It was hard. It was really hard, Christine. So I always reflect honestly on my journey, from even doing international development work to segueing into an industry that I wasn't even familiar with, but I knew I could draw upon my skill sets too. And it wasn't easy because diversity, equity, and inclusion work, it wasn't a really well-known phrase, or it wasn't something that was known in this industry. And it had been an uphill battle for me to help people in the industry understand why it's important, why connection is important, and how it matters for the industry. And so I feel like I've always been, really trying to create dialogue and try to connect with people, and to recognize that this could be a new topic, and that's okay. So it's really interesting because it has been that uphill battle, but it was always something in me that was like, you continue to do this. There is purpose. There is a reason for it. Just keep being who you are, and keep listening. Don't judge, right? Yoga is a part of that. Try not to judge, and really just be yourself. And that has been, through thick and thin, that has been the message that I keep telling myself, as I progressed in my journey. It has being an entrepreneur is hard. You know that.
Yeah.
And so it's been difficult. I've also had, some really major milestones to remind me of how precious life is, and how important purpose is. I've been in two really bad car accidents where I almost thought I was going to die. I had an 18-wheeler come at me, and I survived, and that's not to be taken lightly. I mean, it's another pretty epic car accident, and I'm a good driver, and they weren't my fault. So I've got to say that. But those moments really help you check in and evaluate your life. Am I doing am I doing what I need to be doing? Both my parents have passed, and they were, I'm going to cry, but they were everything to me. I was really close to them. And I take that message, that they've given me, all their messages with me. So just to think about the sacrifices they made, not being from this country, to give me and my siblings the education and the ability to be who I am today, I don't take that lightly.
Yeah. I wish we were not virtual right now.
Okay.
Sending you so much love, but I really, what I love most about you sharing that, and thank you for doing so, is that having had the, the pleasure of being in your presence when you're leading circles or leading meditations or a workshop, like you can feel that when you are creating space. And so I think that's so important. And so I really appreciate that you shared that with us. And the other thing that I was thinking about when you were speaking is, it's hard when things are a continuous uphill battle to keep pushing. And you just like, what if I just stepped over there? That looks way better. And like, sometimes it would be way easier. But I think one of the things that I've seen through these conversations is that when the women I've been speaking to find that purpose, like you mentioned, and they stay connected to it, the way they create in the world has so much more impact. It's just more powerful. It's coming from like this place of self, and it's not coming from a checklist or like the thing I know I can do, or the thing that feels easier that maybe you don't love. That deep like soul connection comes out, and then whoever you're sending your work to receives that. And this is definitely coming back to this yoga mindset, but it just feels better to work with someone who believes that much about the work they're doing, whether that work is, dentistry or being an attorney or being a baker or the work that you're doing. When someone just deeply loves what they're doing, you feel it. And so I always hope that people listening, if they have that feeling, or if they are maybe in that moment of the uphill battle and listening, to just know that it's worth it. And not just for you, but I feel like that ripple is immeasurable when you stay in alignment with the thing that you're supposed to be doing that fills you up.
I completely agree with you. And I would add one thing that has also been a something that I made sure, it must have happened over the pandemic or even before, that I would not compare myself to someone else. And that's the other piece is, feeling like someone else is doing something better than you are, or that the grass is always greener. You never know what's going on with somebody else. So never assume. But I always, I made that point to say, I'm not going to compare myself to someone because I'm not them. I am going to do what I think is best for me. And if someone else is doing something that's like what I'm doing, I'm going to just send them gratitude. I'm going to say, great job, and not think ill will of them because, why? And that genuineness, honestly, has made sure that I connect in a clearer way with people. And it helps me be in that present moment. So that's another thing that I'd like to add on to what you've said.
Yeah. And I think that is both that and coming from a space of non-judgment and non-comparison in the work that you're doing specifically is so powerful, because you're going to be guiding people through conversations where they need both of those tools in order to be successful. And I think all the time too, with not comparing to others. When I started this podcast, I'm like, what, originally I'm like, who am I to do this? I don't even know really what a podcast is. I've only ever listened to a few. I just knew that I wanted to talk to people, and that seemed like a place where people did it, right? And then I would look and be like, oh my gosh, they have like 9 million followers and 5 zillion downloads. I can't do this. And then I was like, you know what? I'm really actually not doing it for that. So just quit worrying about those things that are irrelevant. But that's, you know, that's our human brain wants to like figure out how we can compare ourselves to others. And then just keep going. And it's like every once in a while I will look and I'm like, you know, because as a entrepreneur, you also set goals, right? So there's this balance of like setting a goal, and then like your ego gets a little attached to that goal, and then you're back to like, but it doesn't matter. And it's a very tricky line. I've spent a lot of time in that space over the last year for sure. But I do know, like you said, like, because I just keep creating from this space of love and for it being about my guests and whoever hears their story and how that impacts them and shifts what they do in the world and how that impacts the next person that they can come into connection with. Like for me, that's what it's about. So I'm like, okay, just come back to that's what matters and then move forward. But it can definitely be hard as an entrepreneur to stay operating from that space because we need to make money, we need to meet goals, we need to like have transparent statements of how we're doing XYZ, and that feels very counterintuitive to this process. I don't know if you've definitely landed in that space, but
well, and you also have to know who your competition is, right? And so that's the other piece of that, in that mental space that we can get into. And, you know, as you were talking, you know, I guess this is the DEI brain I have, but there's the bias that comes up of that's unconscious. You know, the competitors and, you know, really, you know, sizing people up, because that's how our brains operate. We operate out of fear. And that is one thing, you know, I try to always do as I say. You talk about unconscious biases, really bring attention to the fact that I'm human, I will have them. But how can I make sure that I make these biases aware? And that's just a constant reminder when it comes to really setting pure intentions.
yeah. And I think the other thing about that is that it's so uncomfortable. So you recognize this bias and you're like, well, now what do I do with it? Most of us are like, you know, like, I don't really want to look that in the eye. And I think, again, we've seen a lot of growth in the past 2 years of people being like, okay, it's time to like, we've got to do this. It has to be uncomfortable. It's time to look at these things, have these conversations, and understand that we're all a part of this. And there's not a way out without like going through it. And it's been definitely, I think, challenging, but also so amazing to see the growth and the conversations that have come out of this space. So I guess it would be a really good time to step more fully into the work that you're doing, and what the intersection between DEI and travel and sustainable travel, and kind of how do all of these pieces come together to make travel a better space for both travelers, but also for the destinations that we interact with, and how does that unfold? How do you see those things connected?
They're all connected. That is a loaded question.
It is. We have part two will be
that we'll have to unpack. So I know that, you know, travel can be a lot of things, and sometimes, and I want to address that too, because, you know, we talk about travel being a way to explore and learn about other cultures, which is very true. I also want to acknowledge that there is, you know, if we're thinking about it through that truly that global DEI lens, there's obviously business travel. There's also travel that has to take place that's like migratory patterns. There are people that don't have access to water that have to travel to, you know, get water and basic needs. So there are so many different forms of travel. And I think that it's really important first to understand that sometimes people have to travel out of necessity, and it's not just leisure. So if you're going to a place where it's a necessity, that's a part of empathy too, and understanding that there's privilege, of course, but there are different means of travel. I think the other part that really just, comes up in my mind is the thought that when you're traveling, it has to be this big to do of you have to go internationally or you have to get on a plane. But travel can be going to the county next door to you, and exploring that. It can be accessible. It doesn't have to be that costly, but the intentions are really important. And so I wanted to make sure that I brought that lens to just my own attention. Sometimes it's good to just say it out loud.
Thank you.
I think sustainable travel, sustainability means so many things to so many people, that definition. But to me, sustainable travel is really thinking about short and long-term outcomes of community. What do we want, from a community standpoint, what do we want community to look and feel like now, and for kids, if we choose to have kids, and for the future? That is sustainable travel, really thinking about longevity and cultivating, cleaner air and a greater earth, and thinking about waste, thinking about people and the value of cultures within a community. How do we sustain those voices and those cultures and that representation? So sustainability to me is that within the community, really thinking about community growth and a community-centric approach. And then it's also, if visitors are coming into a place, it is being able to, in this ideal world, for DEI, being able to understand that there are different people of different backgrounds, abilities, perspectives that are coming to a place and they're learning. They want to learn, hopefully, about your community. So how do you connect? How do you understand that there will be differences, but how can you find connections of purpose and understanding how different people live and operate? How do you welcome? How do you create that welcoming space? So to me, that's sustainability, like sustainable travel. What does a welcoming environment look and feel like? And how can we cultivate that for ourselves and then for visitors too?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I'm already wishing that, like you said, we had so much more time just to like go through the nuances of all of this, because just starting with how you're defining travel is huge, because I jump into every conversation with how I define travel, right? And how I travel personally. And I often forget that there's, this type of travel or this type of travel, because it's not in my live, that's not how I live in travel. And it's not who I'm usually connecting to. And so I love just starting there, being like, what is travel? Travel is all these things. And then if you're going to be addressing how travel is operating more sustainably, and you're looking at it through all of these places, because we can't just address sustainability and adventure travel or educational travel or mindful travel, because we're leaving like a huge portion of how and why people travel out of the conversation. And I think for those of us who are in that pocket, like I am, that is our wish. Like we want that to move into all of these other spaces of conversation in travel. But I think the awareness that we're thinking about it only from what we know about it is huge. And I think that goes much like you're saying, when you travel somewhere and you sit down in community with someone, you're sitting down with them with your lens and your experiences, and which is fair. Like we can't expect people not to have that. But then how do you connect more deeply? How do you bring that awareness? Like you said, how do you start to create those deeper connections? And I think part of why I think travel is so magical is because I think it does invites that more naturally than if you are, commuting on the subway or something. Like you might happen to have a meaningful conversation with someone, but you're tending to be more superficial and you're not as open. But when you're sitting with someone in their home and or in their space in a place you're not familiar with, I feel like we're braver to ask some of those questions, or the way that someone wants to share themselves with us as someone who is an outsider to them. Like it just kind of creates more space for that. If people want to engage and connect more fully and in a way that you think brings more richness to that experience, what does that look like for you, or how would you encourage them to connect?
That's a great question. I think, as you were speaking, I was really listening to what you were saying, and I was thinking about the experiences of travel that I've had, and that one, that it's not humanly possible for us to know everything about everyone, right? Or every perspective. It's just not. We know what we experience. And I remember, for me, traveling in my 20s solo for work is very different than my lens now. As a mom who also thinks that's a very different lens, and traveling with a kid is very different than traveling solo. Um, and so I would say for this place in my life, and this could apply to anyone, really thinking about their travel journey so far and the different lenses that and perspectives they've had throughout their lives, whether you're 16, whether you're 25, you've had it, whether you're 40, 60, whatever that is, you've had different aspects and milestones in your life that affect your perspective and how you travel. And so I use this framework. I've done this before in some workshops that I've held, called People, Place, and Purpose. And it is first reflecting upon yourself, reflecting upon the people that are important in your life. Just thinking about that connection, those connections that are really rich, maybe those that may have fallen off, and, just reflecting upon that again, without that judgment.
Mm.
Places that are most important to you, home base. It could be memories, it could be whatever that is for you. And then your purpose in life. And it doesn't have to be so grandiose. It could be, I don't know what it is yet. What is my purpose? It could be questioning that and reflecting on those things for you. And when you travel to a place, being curious and asking open-ended questions of curiosity, keeping context, of course, in place. But getting to know people through what people through understanding their perspectives on who they like to surround themselves with. What inspires them? What places inspire them? What makes them smile throughout their day? That's a little aspect of purpose, right? So being creative about first understanding who you are, and then trying to connect and learn about different people by asking them questions that you can you can connect with, because they're meaningful, and they transcend, they can transcend a background because you're learning about someone else's perspective. And I have created such genuine connections with people around the world, because I genuinely, respect them, but I want to understand and connect with them.
Yeah, and I think that takes practice, right? Again, going back to the subway conversation, I think a lot of us are really used to surface level, quick conversations, like kind of non-connecting, connecting, like we just kind of have these passings. So practicing, and maybe not practicing with the person on the subway, but with your family or, colleagues, or, and getting used to asking those questions and receiving the answers, because sometimes we're just as uncomfortable with receiving someone's story as we are of like sharing our own. I feel like there's something about how much we protect ourselves in that way. But then all of a sudden, I feel like once you have that like muscle developed, you can have these really meaningful conversations. And I was just in Belize, and I was noticing those conversations happening. in a way that they hadn't happened before, but like people telling me about like what their childhood was like, and um, what they wish for their children, and what they've achieved and what they're proud of. And I'm like, what? We're just sitting here. I don't know you. And I'm having this incredible conversation and learning so much about them and their culture and what it would be like to live there. And all of a sudden, like, I have walked away with this very powerful experience, and that I don't think that would have happened 5 years ago when I traveled, because I would just be nervous to even start a conversation. I'm not sure, am I safe? Is that appropriate? How do I connect? Like, all of these were skills I didn't have. So I think, maybe prefacing some of this with it, like you said, it's okay if you don't know. Like, it isn't something I think that comes by most people naturally, but I think, um, even I think of myself like at networking events, because I'm a horrible networker, because I don't really like to talk about things that don't really matter. Like, I'm like, I want this conversation that we're having straight off the bat. It doesn't work for most people. So I have to like write down a question of, like, what do you like, what makes you happy, a question you had shared with me, like, what is your daily life like have some of those stage questions, because you might not be able to do it right off the bat, and it's okay. Like, just know that, and then just see like what happens. And I think when you start engaging that way, you're going to just be, you'll be like me, it'll be a problem, you'll be addicted to connecting to people in a real deep and meaningful way.
Another question that I like to ask is, how long have you lived here for?
Mhm.
Because you're not assuming that the person's from that place. You just, want to hear a story. And there could be a magnificent story about where they could have been there their whole lives. And maybe they just came here last year. You never know. And that's also another, like a non-judgmental, open-ended question to ask as well.
Yeah. And I think as travelers, if you're engaging with someone who is, working with you as a guide, or, the concierge at a hotel or something like that, asking how long have they worked in travel, or, how long have you worked as a guide? Because that was one of the things that led to this huge conversation about farming and, the Mayan tradition and language, like all of these things, by simply just saying like, have you been doing this work long? And so, yeah, I love that so much. I feel like that is a really powerful way to start engaging. Another thing that I wanted to talk about is then when we have these kind of experiences, how do we start to integrate that and bring it back into our own lives? And you mentioned this, when you were younger and when you came from Sri Lanka back to the US, like that process of integration was it took a long time to kind of even bring that into your life. How do we, when we have these experiences, when we travel, we don't want to let them go. We want them to be a part of who we are moving forward. Like, we've taken the time for travel to allow us to understand ourselves and to understand another part of the world. But I think it's easy to just like let that slip.
Mm-hmm. I think there's so many ways to answer that question. I think when I was when I was younger and I came back from Sri Lanka, I took some time to really think about my life and how profoundly grateful I was to have electricity that didn't go off during the middle of the day, or thinking about the road, just thinking about basic infrastructure we just don't take time to think about and to be grateful for. And so I had to think about my life then, when I was in Sri Lanka, and what it was like. And then I thought about my life, in the United States, and I had to think about, what I was grateful for. But I also had to ask myself, how do I want what I just experienced to change me, and how has it changed me? I think oftentimes I feel like when we travel, we're going away, because we want to just let go, let loose, and we come back sometimes, and it's like, oh, I'm back to the daily grind. And I just don't feel like it doesn't have to be that way. I love being able to go to a place and then really think about what it was about that place or the people I spoke with that I can integrate back into my life. So asking that question, and learning about someone's routine. Maybe they don't take life so seriously. Maybe that's the takeaway. When I come back home, is there something that I can do that reminds me of how this person lives that I can be inspired by, and to integrate? Or maybe there was something that I did on the trip that helped me, not be as stressed out. Can I take that mentality and integrate that back into my daily life? It can be done, but the human brain always says, no, it can't be done. It can't be done, right? We separate. But if we ask ourselves those questions and we acknowledge them and we take the time, even on the plane, to reflect, and to write it down. I'm a big person that likes to write things down, and to pay attention and to create the intention of, I am going to live a more carefree lifestyle, or I am grateful that this person taught me this. I am going to incorporate X into my routine. It'll happen. It's just our intentions too.
And I also think, thank you for sharing those ideas. And I think what I love about them is they seem accessible. And I think sometimes when we start having conversations around like the transformational power of travel or being more mindful or present, integrating, like probably much like when you talk about DEI, like all these words are words that people are like, I don't know what you're talking about. A lot of people are, I don't know how to do that. That seems scary. That's intimidating. But like you said, just writing down like what's an awareness I had, what's a contrast. I think it's really easy to contrast, but like you said, not with judgment, just like awareness. And then be like, I am grateful for. Great. Like that has already shifted more inside yourself than you can even understand. Like we don't have to be the ones like creating this huge change. Like we don't have to be the one in charge of it. It is already happening. Like it happened because of the experience, regardless of you acknowledging it or not. But then when you add that awareness and that acknowledgement, it just like it gets in there a little deeper. And then if you think about it some more, and like you said, you write about it, maybe you come back to it 3 months from now and be like, what was that? What was that way I felt? I've lost it. And then you're like, oh, that was that. So then like it goes in a little bit further. And I think I love that it's something that people can do easily to create such a larger impact from a travel experience.
Absolutely. And even, honestly, if you just need a moment to take a break from whatever it is you're doing, you can close your eyes and visualize that place and just get that feeling, like you said, get that feeling back. And it may sound kind of ridiculous to some, but if you try it and see what happens, and those are ways to definitely incorporate those experiences and those moments into your daily life. It's totally doable.
Yeah. And I think when you really hang on to the energy and the emotion and the feeling of an experience, because that is something our bodies and our minds remember more fully anyway, it can stay with us longer, and we can share that with someone else. Like I had 2 phone calls yesterday with women that they were kind of sharing these ways that travel made us feel. And like we could immediately connect to one another because we had felt that. Like it didn't really matter the destination or anything like that. It was this feeling. And then expressing that to someone else, I can share how I felt so much more deeply with someone than like, oh, the hotel was beautiful, the food was delicious, like, but this deeper, like just feeling is so much more transcendent, and I think powerful. And I love trying to share that with others. And again, also in creating travel experiences, like I'm trying to create those moments where they can harness that feeling. Like there's just these magic moments. And when you feel it, it's something that is so connective. Like, yeah, I'm going on a tangent of
Oh, it's true, because I'm saying
travel.
completely. I think that's another, interesting question to ask. people about, was there, what moment in travel just really transformed your life, or you remember so well? Because it is transformative.
Yeah. Well, I feel like there's so much more that I want to speak about, but we're going to go over our limit if I ask any other big questions. Is there anything, Sophia, that you want to leave us with, or encourage listeners if they're curious about either mindfulness, if they're curious about how to learn more about diversity, equity, inclusion, and travel? Like, what are resources or any last like wisdom you want to share with us?
So many resources. So Well, I would love it if, honestly, if people are interested in learning about the equity, diversity, and inclusion work that I'm working on with Destination International. They actually have a lot of really good reports on a roadmap and understanding they've started to do their EDI work in 2017, and so they've had these reports on the importance of diversity in travel. And so if people are new and just curious about what this is, I think there are already some really great resources, and we're only going to be coming out with more that are data driven. The strategic roadmap, I have it like with me, is just, it's really well done, especially with a policy mind that I have. It's very clear. So that's one. The other organization that I love is CREST. Center for Responsible Travel. And CREST does a lot of fantastic work in responsible travel, but again, really thinking about the importance of sustainable travel. What does that mean? And how to engage communities. And there's some really good reports that they have, and just to learn more about what this is. From a mindfulness standpoint, gosh, listen to your podcast. That's one. And I think the other thing I'd like to leave people with is that it's not it doesn't have to be this big unsurmountable thing. Mindfulness doesn't have to be. It can be done in increments. Every morning I wake up and I take 3 intentional breaths for myself to start my day. It can be that simple. It can be another useful thing that I do to bring myself, or to ground myself, give myself perspective, is to pay attention to my footsteps. And that brings me back to a place, to look at my surroundings, or if you're sensory, to be able to hold on to something. And if you're in a place, like feeling things. So tune into your senses. And it's very doable, and use their community is around you. So just be your authentic and genuine self the best way you can, and people will support that.
Thank you. I totally do the feet all the time. Like, I am a person who is up here most of the time, and I'm like, well, I need to get like back in my body. I need to get back like focused. Like, get out of your head, girl. And like wiggle my toes. I just wiggle my toes, and it just seems too simple, right? But I'm like, okay, there we are. But all the time, or walking, paying attention to your feet, the 3 breaths is amazing. If anybody listening, when you're done, if you just took 3 breaths, it's so crazy how much that can change how you feel. I do that with my 3 daughters all the time. They're like, they all even be like, they come to me and they call it a heart hug, and I hold them and we just do 3 breaths together. And like, I 99% of the time, whatever else is happening is just fine after that. Like the power of 3 breaths and your feet. It seems crazy, but it will like change people's lives.
Mhm.
It really will. And the other one, like you said, senses. When I was traveling, I often start thinking about like, oh, what's a great shot for Instagram? Oh, this is a story I could write. Oh, this is really interesting. Oh, I don't want to forget this moment. Like, I, again, like start getting so much in my head. And one of my guests mentioned that actually another one of the guests, they were traveling together and both doing that. And she's like, here's what I do. I stop and I say, what can I hear? What can I smell?
Mhm.
What do I feel? And you're like, oh, you just, again, you like come so much into yourself. And then the experience is so much richer because now you're noticing those things and you're like, wow, I didn't notice I could smell the like jungle around me right now, or I didn't notice I could feel the moisture on my skin. And then it just creates something. And I think doing that in your daily life, which I'm very bad at, is also really powerful to just stop and, like you said, just ask your senses, what are they experiencing? And it just really changes your appreciation for what's happening around you, and just like helps you to calm down and center if you have that issue. I feel like I'm not alone in that.
I have it, and I do with my son. I do it with him too. That's exactly what I do. And we go out and we walk, and I ask him all these questions, and he'll tune in, and it helps me tune in too.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
it's we're human. These are things, that we have to remind ourselves of doing.
yeah. Well, Sophia, as we end our conversation, I just encourage listeners to check out the resources you mentioned. I'm so glad you mentioned Crest. I had wanted to bring them into this conversation, so that'll just be a teaser that people need to learn more. But I have our 7 rapid fire-ish questions to end our conversation. So we'll jump into those next here. What is your favorite book or movie that offers you a travel escape or inspires you to adventure?
Oh my goodness. I'm looking around. Beyond Guilt Trips is a really good book that I use.
We're reading that in my book Sojourn next month, and I cannot wait. What is always in your suitcase when you travel?
um, Always in my suitcase. Oh, this is hard. You know what? I bring aromatherapy thing, like a scented. I have it right here. I bring just like a little aromatherapy bottle with me.
Yeah,
Always with me.
that is good. What has been your favorite destination?
Oh my goodness, these are hard.
They are hard.
Oh, um, oh my goodness, what takes me back? I have to say, a transformational moment I had was in Myanmar.
Where do you still long to visit?
Everywhere. Gosh, these are so hard. I long to go back to Sri Lanka. I haven't been there since I was 10.
Oh, it keeps calling me, so maybe we'll get to go together. That would be amazing. What do you eat that immediately connects you to a place you've been?
Bengali food. My mom's cooking.
Who is the person that inspired and encouraged you to set out and explore the world?
My parents, both
Um,
equally.
yeah. And if you could take an adventure with one person, fictional or real, alive or past, who would it be?
I would take an adventure with my grandparents that ones I have not met, so I could experience life through their lens
Yeah,
in time.
that would be amazing. Oh, Sophia, we knew we wouldn't have enough time, but we got it in there. So I appreciate so, so much you coming on and sharing. I feel like there's so much more. So maybe we'll have to have a part 2, but thank you for being here today.
Thank you for creating the space, Christine.
Thank you.